Imagine going to the supermarket and walking straight past the produce aisle, not because you forgot, not because you're skipping carbs, because you genuinely do not need anything there. Your pantry is full, your cellar is full, and it has been that way every single week for 200 years. That is not a fantasy. That is an ordinary Tuesday for farming families in County Clare, in County Cork, in the rural valleys of Connaught. They grow it, store it, replant it, and harvest it on a cycle that has never been interrupted. Not by inflation, not by supply chain collapse, not by a single bad month at the checkout. What you are about to learn is the exact system they use to produce a full year's supply of potatoes from a small plot of ground, with no commercial inputs, at a cost that rounds down to almost nothing. Stay with me until the end. Because the last technique I'm going to share is something I found buried in a 1920s agricultural survey from the Irish Congested Districts Board, and I have never seen it documented in a single modern growing guide. Now, the average household spends between $400 and $800 per year on potatoes and potato products. That is $4,000 to $8,000 over a decade, $20,000 to $40,000 over a lifetime. All of it going straight to distributors, cold storage facilities, and supermarket chains. For a crop that your great-grandparents grew in their backyard without a second thought. What if the most effective potato production system ever designed was already perfected 2 centuries ago on the west coast of Ireland? And the only reason you don't use it is because the people who profit from selling you food have absolutely no interest in you finding out that you never needed them at all. The Irish relationship with the potato goes back to the late 1600s, but it was in the 18th and early 19th centuries that Irish smallholders developed what agricultural historians now recognize as one of the most sophisticated subsistence growing systems in European history. These were not large farms. The average Irish smallholder operated on a plot of between half an acre and 2 acres. On that land, they fed a family, maintained seed stock for the following year, and critically, never experienced a single season without a harvest, even in difficult years, because the system was built with redundancy at every layer. There were 3 elements that made it self-sustaining across generations. First, variety selection and seed sovereignty, maintaining their own seed potato lines without ever buying replacements. Second, the ridge system, known locally as lazy beds, a highly engineered growing method that solved drainage, soil fertility, and yield density simultaneously. Third, a storage and cycling system that kept potatoes usable from October through to the following June, bridging the gap between harvests without a single refrigerated unit. Here at Ancient Roots Garden, this is exactly the kind of system we document, the methods that fed whole communities for centuries, preserved so they don't disappear. Today I'm walking you through all 3 layers in full, and the technique at the end involves none of the equipment you'd expect. The first thing the modern gardening industry does not want you to understand is this: you do not need to buy seed potatoes. Ever. After the first year, here is how it works. When you harvest a potato crop, a portion of your yield, roughly 10 to 15%, is set aside not for eating but for replanting. These are called seed potatoes. You select them deliberately, medium-sized tubers, no damage, no disease, firm skin. You store them separately. You replant them the following season. That's the entire system. The potato reproduces from a piece of itself. Each seed potato produces between 5 and 10 new tubers. Plant 10 seed potatoes and you harvest between 50 and 100 potatoes. Keep 10 of those back. Plant them next year. The ratio holds. What nobody explains, and this is the detail that changes everything, is that Irish smallholders didn't just save any tubers. They practiced what's now called positive selection. They only saved tubers from the most vigorous, heaviest-yielding plants. Not the biggest tubers from an average plant, the best tubers from the best plant. Over generations, this naturally improved the variety's performance on their specific soil and microclimate. Their seed stock became locally adapted in a way no commercially produced seed ever can be, the practical version for a home grower. Mark your 3 best performing plants with a stake when the foliage is still visible. When you harvest, pull those plants last and set that yield aside as your seed stock. Do this for 3 seasons in a row. Your yield will increase without any other intervention. One thing that derails this before it starts: seed potatoes stored in warm, dark conditions sprint into sprouting before you ever get them in the ground. The fix is called chitting. 6 weeks before planting, move your seed potatoes into a cool, light location, not dark, not warm, with the row's end facing upward. The shoots that develop in light are short, stubby, and strong. The ones that develop in the dark are long, pale, and fragile. Short, chitted shoots produce earlier, heavier yields. It costs you nothing except remembering to do it. This is the part that separates a garden that needs a seed catalog every spring from one that has been self-funding for 2 centuries. The phrase "lazy bed" was applied to the Irish ridge method by 18th century English agricultural observers, and it was not a compliment. They considered it primitive, inefficient, a mark of poverty. Those observers were wrong. And the irony is that the techniques they dismissed are now being rediscovered by permaculture researchers, no-dig advocates, and soil scientists, who are finding that the lazy bed outperforms conventional row planting on multiple metrics simultaneously. Here is what a lazy bed actually is. You mark out strips of ground approximately 4 to 5 feet wide, separated by shallow drainage channels roughly 1 foot wide. You do not dig the growing strip. You do not turn the soil. Instead, you lay your seed potatoes directly on the surface of the existing ground, on top of the grass, on top of whatever is growing there, and you cover them with material drawn from the drainage channels on either side. That material is a combination of sod, subsoil, and organic matter. You are building a raised planting ridge without removing or inverting anything. The lazy bed solves 4 problems at once. Natural drainage. The channels carry away excess water that would otherwise rot tubers. Loose, deep soil structure, exactly what potato tubers need to expand without resistance. Organic matter incorporated without composting it first. The sod decomposes in place underneath the tubers, feeding the crop through the season. And no external inputs whatsoever, no bagged compost, no fertilizer. Nothing purchased. Here is the detail no other guide explains. The most common reason home growers get small tubers from healthy-looking plants is compaction. They plant into flat, unmodified ground. The tubers hit resistance 6 inches down, and they stop expanding. The lazy bed eliminates that problem entirely, because you are never walking on the growing zone. The ridge is built from the sides. Root penetration improves by 30 to 40% in the first season alone, according to TGESC, the Irish Agriculture and Food Development Authority, comparing traditional bed systems with modern mechanized plots. Same variety, same seed, bigger yield because the soil around it was never compacted in the first place. Now we get to the technique that most growers either don't know or don't do consistently enough. And it is the single highest leverage action in the entire system. As the potato plant grows, it produces tubers not just at the base of the original seed, but all the way up the stem, at every point where the stem is buried in soil or darkness. The Irish system exploited this completely. The practice is called earthing up. As the haulm, the above-ground stem, grows, you progressively mound additional soil up around the base of the plant, burying the lower stem. The plant responds by producing a new layer of tubers along the buried section. You earth up again 3 or 4 weeks later. Another layer forms. A plant earthed up twice correctly can produce 2 to 3 times the yield of a plant left to grow without intervention. Same seed potato, same plot, 2 to 3 times the harvest. The Irish-specific detail. They earthed up not with loose topsoil but with a mixture of soil and partially decomposed organic material, saved compost, old bedding straw, or surface sod. The organic material retains moisture against the stem, which is exactly where the new tuber formation is happening. Dry earthing up with sandy soil works mechanically but slows tuber development at the new nodes. Moisture at the stem is the variable that controls the yield difference. Use compost mixed half and half with soil. If you have no compost, layer straw into the mound at 6-inch intervals. The difference is measurable from the first harvest. I want to stop here for a second because I think this is the point in the video where the full picture starts to land. We are talking about a system built by people who had almost nothing. No machinery, no agricultural supply chain, no refrigeration. And what they produced from a half-acre plot with their own saved seed in a climate that makes growing difficult was a complete, year-round food supply that sustained families across generations. The lazy bed is not a primitive technique. The earthing up system is not folk wisdom. These are precision solutions to specific biological problems, developed over centuries of observation and refined by necessity. The fact that we stopped using them is not because we found something better. It is because someone found a way to sell us a replacement. Now, back to the system. The Irish smallholder tradition, particularly in the West, did not plant one variety in one permanent location. They rotated across a minimum of 3 growing areas and maintained 2 or 3 distinct varieties simultaneously. And this is the layer that collapses most modern home-growing attempts before the second season. Potato blight and soil-borne diseases accumulate in ground that carries potatoes repeatedly. If you are losing crops to blight every year in the same beds, the system itself is broken. Not the soil, not the weather, not the variety. Rotation is the fix, and it requires no chemicals, no sprays, no purchased inputs of any kind. The 3-bed rotation runs like this. Year 1, bed A carries potatoes. Year 2, bed A carries a nitrogen-fixing crop, beans or clover. Year 3, bed A carries brassicas or root vegetables that draw on the residual nitrogen. Year 4, potatoes return. The soil in Year 4 is more fertile and more disease-resistant than it was in Year 1, entirely through biological cycling. The variety management piece that's rarely discussed. Maintaining an early variety, a main crop variety, and a late storage variety simultaneously staggers your harvest across June, August, and October. There is never a gap month. The storage burden on any single variety is reduced. And critically, if one variety has a difficult season, the other 2 carry the system. Redundancy at every layer. That phrase keeps coming back because it is the entire philosophy. A note on blight-tolerant varieties for anyone in a high-humidity climate. Sarpo Myra, Orla, and Setanta were developed specifically for Irish growing conditions and carry strong natural resistance. Growing one of these alongside your standard main crop variety builds resilience into the system without any additional management. Growing potatoes is only half the system. The Irish tradition produced a year-round supply not because they could grow potatoes in December, they cannot, but because they could store a harvest from October through to June of the following year without a single refrigerated unit. The mechanism is called a clamp, 3 centuries old, still used by commercial potato growers in parts of Ireland and the UK today. Here is the construction. Select a well-drained area of ground. Lay a base of straw, approximately 6 to 8 inches deep. Pile your cured potatoes directly onto the straw bed in a long, low heap, angled at roughly 45 degrees on each side. Cover the heap with another thick layer of straw, 4 to 6 inches across all surfaces. Over the straw, apply a layer of soil, 4 to 6 inches, compacted with the back of a spade. Leave a ventilation channel at the ridge, a strip of straw left unsoiled along the top, to allow gas exchange. The clamp maintains a stable internal temperature of between 4 degrees C and 7 degrees C through the passive insulation of the straw and soil layers. That range inhibits sprouting, suppresses disease development, and prevents frost damage without power, without refrigeration, without any ongoing maintenance except a check every 6 to 8 weeks. 2 things that cause clamp failures, both of them avoidable. Green potatoes in your clamp are a light exposure problem from before storage. They need to be removed before loading because they introduce a disease pathway. Soft rot developing before January means either the base layer is retaining moisture or the soil seal has gaps. Reopen the clamp, add dry straw to the base, reseal carefully. Both problems are correctable. A correctly built clamp keeps main crop potatoes in eating condition from October through May or June, 8 months. A well-insulated clamp in a sheltered location can extend that to July. And now, the detail buried in the 1923 survey. In 1923, the Irish Congested Districts Board published a series of field reports on agricultural practice in County Mayo and County Galway. Not academic documents, practical field reports, written by extension officers who had spent years working directly with farming families on the western seaboard. One report, from a field officer named Patrick J. Leon, documented a storage practice specific to communities in that high-rainfall coastal region. Before loading the clamp, families pre-treated their storage potatoes with a dusting of dry wood ash from the previous winter's fire. Not a soaking, not a treatment you buy. A light surface dusting, a thin coating over each tuber. Leon documented that families using this practice consistently reported lower disease loss over winter, specifically less wet rot and less bacterial soft rot, compared to untreated clamps in the same townland. He attributed it to the alkaline surface treatment and the desiccating effect of the ash on the potato skin, which he believed hardened it against fungal entry. That observation sat in an archived government document for approximately 100 years. In 2019, a soil science paper from researchers at University Cork examined wood ash applications in small-scale potato growing and found that surface ash treatment measurably reduced bacterial soft rot incidence in storage by inhibiting the moisture film on which the bacteria travel. The mechanism Leon described in 1923, without any knowledge of the microbiology, turned out to be accurate. A fire, a bucket, the ash from last winter's wood. A storage loss reduction technique documented before your grandparents were born, confirmed by a university laboratory 96 years later. I've been sitting with that for a long time. Let me bring the full system together. 5 layers. 1. Seed sovereignty. Save 10 to 15% of your best harvest from your best plants, chit them in light before planting, and never buy seed again after year 1. 2. The lazy bed ridge system. Build raised ridges with sod and organic matter from the channels. No digging, no compaction, no purchased inputs. The soil builds itself from below. 3. Earthing up with moisture-retaining material twice per season, mixed half and half with organic matter. 2 to 3 times the yield from the same seed potato. 4. 3-bed rotation with staggered varieties. Break the disease cycle biologically. Spread the harvest across 3 months. Build redundancy into the system. 5. The clamp. Straw base, straw cover, soil layer, ventilation ridge, wood ash pre-treatment. 8 months of storage. No electricity. That is the complete system. Every layer documented, tested, and in continuous use for 2 centuries before the first supermarket ever opened. If you have ever stood in a supermarket in January, put a bag of potatoes in your trolley, and felt, even briefly, that something about that transaction was unnecessary, you were right. It has always been unnecessary. The system fits in a backyard. It costs almost nothing after the first season. It gets better every year as your seed stock adapts to your soil. And it was perfected long before anyone thought to charge you for it. You now know what Patrick Leon documented in a field report that sat unread for 100 years. What part of this system are you putting in the ground first? Drop it in the comments. Are you starting with the ridge, the seed saving, or the clamp? I want to know where in the world this harvest is about to start. And if uncovering systems like this, old, proven, and deliberately overlooked, is why you come to Ancient Roots Garden, then you already know what to do. Subscribe. The next video goes deeper into traditional European food preservation, and it makes this one look like the introduction.